Hi everyone, I'm Peter Bracketsillis and I'm going to be your host today. I work within our Azure Cloud and Infrastructure team here at Professional Advantage. Today I'll be joined very shortly by my co-host, a senior member from our Azure Technical Consulting team, whom some of you have already worked with, and you'll be very familiar with this person. Today's webinar represents part one in our planned Azure Cloud series that we are running, with second and third parts planned to be scheduled for early in 2022. Today is all about setting the foundations with Azure Cloud, or back to basics, as we have themed this particular first part. In parts 2 and 3, we plan to build on today and show you how to better enable business resilience and support the distributed hybrid workplace. And part 3, we'll be introducing you to data and data services, which includes artificial intelligence and machine learning. So keep an eye out for those. Should be a great 3-part series in production. Before we kick things off, I'd like to take this opportunity to make an acknowledgement of country. I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay our respects to their elders, past and present. I further extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples online with us today participating in our event. So let's get started. Firstly, today we'll share with you what we hear as internal and external forces driving organizations we speak to considering initial or further investments in cloud platform adoption. But today, what we've assumed is we have an audience specifically with no footprint yet, or at least early phases of your respective adoption journey with cloud and Microsoft Azure specifically. Secondly, we will establish the fundamentals of the Azure Cloud Service platform and its core pillars of capabilities that it offers today, which we plan with and execute with customers every day here at PA. Thirdly, we will cover what is typically involved in planning for and then executing those migration plans to Azure Cloud, or hybrid Azure Cloud, which is more and more prevalent today as customers take that journey. And finally, we will reveal for you a pathway and a roadmap of activities that can get you started from today and how we can help you here at PA. We typically look and listen for one or more of these key customer, what we call migration, modernization triggers, or some of you may know that as a compelling event for investing in migration project to Azure Cloud. And we've highlighted some of the more prolific ones we see in orange. One, this helps us better understand customers' current state or your current state, plus unlocking or ideating a desired or an aspirational future state. Second, most prolific of these are, as I highlighted, maybe your data center lease contract is expiring in the near horizon, or B, your software and hardware refresh cycle is coming up. Typically, they can range from 3 to 5 years in our experience. Maybe an organization has experienced a serious security event, and that has increased the threat risk escalation beyond their current capability to prevent that in future, or just an end of a software agreement. Typically that can go from 3 to 4 years as well. These are all key triggers that we see over and over again that organizations approach us. Secondary triggers can include burstable capacity need in compute or storage, which is difficult when you've got on-premise infrastructure and lead time to get equipment, or cost that is unbudgeted for as a CapEx. Rapid response to potential M&A activity, needing you to smash together 2 organizations or decouple an organization from its parent very quickly and have that stand on its own 2 feet. Or maybe stringent compliance and regulatory requirements that you're unable to meet with your current on-premise infrastructure. Either they are new requirements or expanded requirements, and we're seeing quite a bit of that. And one thing that I would like to draw your attention on this slide is the apps innovation trigger or compelling event. This is typically top-down driven. CEO, general manager of an organization needs to be dealt with strategically, typically, and that could mean all kinds of 2 or 3 kinds of scenarios: faster product development cycle, quicker time to market for a new product or service, becoming very much a digital enterprise, both in your physical and digital business model. So if you're in the physical economy, where you're moving goods and services, there's a very strong drive to become more digital in your back-end processes to support that physical frontline worker. This visual represents one page, the spectrum of core capability pillars that are available within the Azure cloud stack as we see it today. And the rest of the webinar today will give you a short preview to this. And what I'd like to focus your attention on, the left side, for the four left side most columns are typically what we see as Azure infrastructure service capabilities. And the right four most are typically focused on application services, be they bespoke apps, web apps, mobile apps, API apps. And the middle one is all about the data estate and Azure's very comprehensive data services layer, which incorporates AI and machine learning and a whole bunch of advanced analytics and stream analytics. So that we're not going to be able to cover by any means that, but that is a very broad, deep and rich platform of infrastructure, platform and software as services, which customers consume as a pay-as-you-go or prepaid reserved capacity. And now I want to hand over and introduce you all to my co-host and key presenter, Keivan Mahmoudi, who's one of our senior security and cloud architects within our Azure team. Keivan has served the PA now over 3 years, and I work very closely with Keivan and the rest of the team. More than 15 years in our industry as tenure, and leads many of our planning and design phases of projects that some of you have already been involved with, as well as getting hands-on, still gets his hands very dirty, in implementation. So welcome, Keivan, and let's talk about Azure fundamentals.
Thank you, Peter, and hello, everyone. My name is Keivan. I'm the cloud and security architect here at Professional Advantage. I've been working in IT infrastructure and cloud and security for over 15 years, actually closer to 20 years now. So I'm going to talk about Microsoft Azure Basic and fundamentals, what it is, what it does, and how we can benefit from it, really. So before we actually start talking about Azure, I want to take a moment and talk about cloud computing concept in general, because that helps us describe the Azure more accurately. So cloud computing is basically the delivery of computing services over internet or a private link. To put it in another way, it's a way to rent compute power, storage, or any other technology or service from someone else's data center. So instead of maintaining hardware, warranties, etc., in your data center or server room, you rent them for the time period that you need. Then it's the cloud provider's responsibility to take care of maintaining the underlying infrastructure for you. So you can treat cloud resources like you would in your own data center. The difference is when you are done using them, you just give them back and you get billed for that period of the time that you use them. Mostly they have a pay-as-you-go pricing model, meaning you typically pay only for the services that you utilize within that time. And in general, cloud computing helps you in many different ways, really. I have highlighted a few here that we often hear from our clients, which help them in that space, but I will go through the benefits in more depth in other slides today. So there are different types of cloud computing, which is private, public, and hybrid cloud, as you can see in this slide. Private cloud is the cloud computing resources used exclusively by one business or organization. You are not sharing any resources with anyone else. They are just purely for yourself. Then we have the public cloud, which is the most common type of cloud computing these days. The cloud resources like servers and storages are owned and operated by third-party service provider and delivered over the internet. With the public cloud, all hardware, software, and supporting infrastructure are owned and managed by the cloud provider. In a public cloud, you share the same hardware, storage, and network devices with other organizations or clouds, like we call it tenants, and you access services and manage your account using a management portal. Public cloud deployments are frequently used to provide web-based emails, online office applications like storages and testing and development environments. And finally, we have the hybrid cloud on top, which is the integration of your on-prem data center or server room with a public cloud or private cloud is called hybrid cloud. You can have the best of both worlds, really. For example, if you have some infrastructure component that must stay on-prem for any reason, you still deploy the cloud and integrate with cloud, but then you're working in a hybrid kind of environment. So now that we know these cloud types, then let's just talk about the Microsoft Azure and what is Microsoft Azure. So Azure is a set of cloud services provided by Microsoft that expands across all three cloud types that we discussed earlier, which are private, public, and hybrid. In the Azure, we have three main categories of the services, which are infrastructure, platform, and software as a service, as you can see on the screen. So infrastructure services are basically the essential components of any a typical IT environment. For example, like your virtual machines, your data, your applications, or your virtual WAN or VPN, anything as considered an infrastructure, they fall into infrastructure as a service. Then we have platform as a service, which are services that by nature require an infrastructure to run. But to take the complexity out of the occasion, Microsoft takes care of maintaining the infrastructure aspects of it, and we only utilize the final product as a service without worrying about how the infrastructure is being handled at the back end. There are things like database hosting, website hosting, and Azure functions and things like that. And we finally have the software as a service, which are things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and IoT, and many things in that category. So now we know the cloud in general, and we know the Azure. And well, like one question would be why we should consider actually moving to Azure. So there are many benefits really, but let's touch base on some important ones that we have listed here. Firstly, security. So the security of your IT environment often relies on the knowledge and capabilities of the IT team or the service provider that you may have. If the environment is large enough, you may have dedicated security officer or technicians as well, but ultimately there are limited resources and budgets for the security aspects of the IT environment. On the other hand, we have Microsoft that allocates $1 billion annually on cybersecurity research and more than 3,500 security experts dedicated to data security and privacy. So we can imagine the security offerings and completeness provided by such investment and team obviously has the potential to be more robust than what we can implement as an individual. One thing that I personally like in Azure is that when you implement a workload in Azure, being a virtual machine or a storage or database, it comes and provides the security recommendations for the workload. And if you don't follow, it keeps flagging them as a risk right in front of your eyes over and over again. So it's really hard to miss that. Another aspect is obviously cost saving and lowering your total cost of ownership. We often have this conversation with clients when like comparing the server cost on-prem within cloud, you have to actually include all elements that contribute to the cost of components on-prem or in your data center. For example, for a virtual machine, the cost of server hardware, its warranty, the cost of underlying virtualization component, like for example, if you're using VMware or anything like that, the licensing for that, the cost of UPS and maintenance, batteries, all of these components you have to actually count and add them up and then compare with the identical service you are getting from cloud. And when you do that, it's much easier to identify the benefit in there. And there are some Azure specific benefits as well, like Azure hybrid benefit and reserved instances, which are basically the allowance for you to use your on-prem licenses in a cloud environment or to reserve a specific resource for a certain period of the time and save on the cost of that resource. Scalability is also considered the main factor for many organizations to choose to Azure environment. You may have systems that struggle with resources only at a specific time, like, for example, finance system at the month end, or intranet system at the time of a product launch. But that doesn't justify for you to replace the entire hardware on-prem because of the cost associated for that, or maybe because of the impact it may have on the other systems. Whereas in Azure, you can do that within a few clicks, literally. Change a server from 1 CPU and 4 GB RAM into a 80 CPU and 500 GB of RAM within 2 minutes, really. And change back whenever not needed anymore. In fact, there are auto-scaling features that you can use. They're called scale sets in Azure, which can automatically increase or decrease the number of VM instances that run for a certain application elastically. The scalability also can be reviewed at the global level. For example, if you have global presence or offices, or even inside Australia, you have different regions, offices in different regions, you can choose your servers and data to operate in different regions based on the end user location. For example, you can have a pool of servers in different regions. So someone accessing your server from Melbourne can hit the closest server to them in Victoria, and someone else from Sydney can hit another server in New South Wales, which is closer to them. And obviously, then it will be less time around to access the data. So essentially, we can design and deliver the way your business demands, as opposed to being limited by what your IT servers and data center can provide. And obviously, availability is another factor. It's very important as well. Deploying high availability and redundancy for on-prem and data center environments are often associated with a big price tag, because that means you have to have more than one instance of everything. If it's a firewall or a server or a disk storage, you have to have multiple of those next to each other for you to be able to have availability in place. But that's not the case for an Azure environment. Your data and workload can be easily accessed from another region just because you have enabled the high availability feature for that component in Azure. Or you can have your data to be backed up in a different region, which is actually a requirement by many data compliance standards these days. So really, there are, if I want to explain all the benefits, the list is really long, but these are the main ones that we came across to be very generic, and many can benefit from these ones. Often within a few months after cloud adoption, you start seeing these benefits, and they are really tangible. My colleague Peter can actually show you a few highlights from some of the clients that has actually done that. Peter, just for you, if you want to explain a few more client case studies.
Yes, thanks, Keivan. Let me do that. I appreciate it. So the first of the two customer proof points for Azure cloud migration we wanted to share today has to do with a major IT transformation body of work we conducted at Energy and Water Ombudsman, New South Wales. As you can see, I have a short 1-minute video testimonial playing on the screen on this slide in the background, which you will receive with this slide deck, plus the recording in our post-event communique, which will also have a link to our website, written case study around EWON. The backdrop here was EWON had an aging on-premise data center infrastructure with a very high TCO, total cost of ownership, and operating. Same with their endpoint management, which impacted the end user experience with the staff's usage of EWON's business IT systems. EWON had approached the market via a procurement process, RFT, which was facilitated for them by an external consultancy company, KPMG. And we were honored and fortunate to have been selected as the successful preferred partner to work with EWON to execute their migration. So by migrating to Azure, what EWON's approximately 40 VMware virtualized server workloads. They also activating the Azure cloud-based endpoint configuration and management service, platform service, integrated with Azure AD plus and Intune. What EWON was able to do is modernize and centrally secure and manage both their 100 plus endpoint devices and user identities, as well as their core IT system workloads, in a fashion that, in their words, would have been unachievable if they had continued to stay on their on-premise data center infrastructure. They definitely were able, and we're proud to say, tick the boxes that Keivan has just highlighted to you in the previous slide around the migration benefits. And some were immediate, some were took a number of months to realize, and it was all around. They ticked the box on scalability, yes, security, much deeper, much broader, much more predictable in defense in depth. Cost savings, I call out one specific number, a 50% drop in their help desk tickets monthly was a significant, almost immediate benefit, and obviously unlocking all those software and hardware maintenance costs and overall flexibility. So that was something that we wanted to share today. The next one has to do with Wine Australia. Wine Australia is the advocacy association for the Australian wine growers, producers, and exporters. And that was also a significant IT transformation body of work. Like EWON, you can see the same 1-minute video testimonial we were able to work with Wine Australia for producing, as well as a very insightful case study that I will encourage you to check out. Backdrop here was we started working with Wine Australia early 2020, just before the arrival of COVID pandemic here in Australia. Wine Australia had expressed to us a desire to improve their cybersecurity posture due to a growing security threat profile that they were experiencing in the late 2019, early 2020. Backdrop being the geopolitical climate and trade war backdrop, and wanting to significantly mitigate that risk through threat prevention, detection, response capability. So Azure AD premium plans for securing identities, Azure Secure Center, Azure Defender or Microsoft Defender, also web application firewall, all technologies in the Azure stack that were able for us to help put up some very robust defenses in depth for Wine Australia and all their content and services that they were not only internally using, but also presenting to their membership. Two more critical business requirements included their core content publishing system, leading industry product called Kentico, which was on-premise. It wanted to undergo a modernization and hosting on a more highly scalable, high-performing underlying infrastructure. So we planned and executed a migration of that onto the Azure Web App PaaS platform, as well as moving 10 of their data center workloads across and over 7 terabytes of content. So it was a pretty significant body of work that allowed us to help Wine Australia move effectively their core IT infrastructure and application platform over to Azure. Third thing was to enable a highly productive, flexible hybrid workplace. So again, with Azure Virtual Desktop Delivery, we were able to execute a cost-effective remote access solution. So like EWON, they definitely were able to tick the boxes that Keivan highlighted before around security, scale, system availability, and cost savings. As you can see, almost $250,000 per annum. So that was a significant benefit in being able to move that core on-premise legacy infrastructure into a more modernized cloud environment. So that's all I wanted to share today, that we wanted to share. Back to you, Keivan, to I guess show people the next, how to embark on that journey.
Yep, no worries. Thank you, Peter. Okay, so really, we have heard about the benefits. We have heard about what it is, and all the aspects, how it may help your organization. Um, so let's say you have identified Azure and cloud migration is the right transformation for your environment, but often it is still remains a question how to do the transition, where to begin, how to adopt all these new technologies, or even transform transform from what you have to a more modern environment. The good news here is, as much as Microsoft has provided all these new features and technologies in Azure, they have also covered the transition area as well. They have provided what is called Cloud Adoption Framework for Azure, which is a guidance system, really. It's designed to help you create and implement business and technology strategies necessary for your organization to succeed in cloud. It gives you really a set of tools, documents, and best practices at every stage of the journey to maximize the growth opportunity you can achieve from cloud. And how actually realize them by using the cloud tools and technologies. Firstly, first step is to define the strategy, basically defining business justification and expected outcome of cloud adoption. Then is planning stage, where we start mapping action items needed to achieve each of those strategy goals we have defined earlier. Then there is readiness, which is preparing your organization for cloud. This is very important, and many actually miss that step. It involves aligning people, processes, and technologies, and also addressing any skills gap in adopting these new technologies as well. It might be some sort of training workshop for the people. It might be some sort of communications to them. It might be of any different sorts, but this is really necessary to ensure a successful transition. And finally, it's adoption, which is preparing your cloud environment firstly, and then moving your workloads into the cloud. Many actually come and call this last component of adoption a migration, and they only focus on that area and missing out on all these main 3 steps beforehand. But then that's not really how it should be done. The reason is, if your environment is not ready to adopt the cloud, then it's doomed to be to failure. If you have not actually put the strategy beforehand, then you may adopt cloud environments, but then you may see that there are things need to be changed as you go because the strategy was not there in the first place. So it's really important to do all these ones in an order for a successful cloud adoption. When it comes to cloud migration, there are multiple approaches we may choose we may choose for organization, or we may choose actually different approaches for different workloads for your organization. So you may actually mix and match different approaches when it comes to the cloud adoption. So I don't want really to go through all these details, but at a high level, it's good to quickly review the different approaches that we often choose for migration. You can see them in the first column. The main ones are, as you know, is lift and shift, which is moving your workload literally as is, with minimum changes to it, nothing changed, just taking it from your on-prem or data center and hosting it in Azure environment. Then we have the refactor, which is kind of lift and shift with minor adjustment and minor changes into that to make it more suitable for a cloud environment. And we have a re-architect as well. That is transforming the application completely to adopt the cloud environment. Many times, if you come from an old-fashioned or maybe very outdated application, then re-architect may be the right choice for you for that specific application. Then we have a rebuild, which is basically rebuilding the application or server from scratch, but this time actually keeping in mind all the cloud components and integrating those components as we build them again. And finally, we have replace, which is adopting an existing cloud native application which delivers the same outcome. As in, for example, you may use some sort of a database on a server, but if there is an existing service which already provides the same functionality, we may choose to use that instead of just deploying a server and hosting a database on it. Each approach, as you can see, serves a different purpose and may have different business drivers for that, or needs different considerations that I don't want to go through, but they are things that we need to keep in mind to pick the right approach for every and single of the workloads that you may have. So it may seem a bit complicated and tedious process to follow these cloud adoption framework and all these transformation, but we can help you on the journey. And we have a special offering today, which my colleague Peter will explain to you shortly now.
Thanks, Keivan. That's some very sage advice and recommendations you've shared there with our audience. Before we open the floor for some questions, we wanted to remind you that in your go-to webinar panel, we've provided you with a cloud migration checklist in the form of a very small ebook which you can download, and just to get you started with migrating your own on-premises workloads to Azure. So that's complimentary of PA and Microsoft. So that's something that we thought we'd include today. If you need further guidance with assessing your readiness, like Keivan alluded to, or planning your migration roadmap, evaluating the cost of migration to put into a business case justification for either for your next fiscal cycle, and we get that a lot, or maybe getting some funding in the second half of your fiscal year as you come up for review mid-year if your fiscal year is July to June. You can sign up for our complimentary one-day, up to about 8 hours of cloud readiness workshop. We can do it in one block or a set of sessions, and that works quite well to get a feel from our expertise and our experience. So you can indicate your interest today by filling out the survey at the end of today's session. So just wanted to call that out. We also look forward to having you again at part 2 of this series happening in February next year. That will focus on the next, installment around hybrid workplace using Azure Virtual Desktop Services in Azure and making that work cost effectively. So with that, let's open the floor for audience questions, and I'll see if there's any that have come through from our production team in the back. Let me just check here. One has come through, and Keivan, you're going to have to help me here. Yep. The question that has come through is, how can we benefit from Azure Cloud because our services and capabilities if we are not yet ready to move or migrate server workloads from our current on-premises data center environment? Able to speak to that?
Yep. Okay, so basically, as we said, there is actually a framework and transition plan to move to Azure, which we have to adopt that for transitioning all the services into cloud. But let's say if we don't want to do that at all, or as you mentioned, if an environment is not ready to adopt that, there are still services that you can benefit from in Azure that I can name a few. For example, backup is one of them. Yes, the backup is one of them. Many actually of clients that we have, they may not have much of an environment in Azure, but they are utilizing the Azure backup system. It is, that it is often a requirement of the compliance requirement that you have to have offsite backup and backup test strategies in place and everything. So you can so much have your own data center and on-premise environment and servers running live, but their backup is actually are taken from those machines into an Azure storage which that the storage can be selected as a, to be a multi-geo kind of storage, which expands across multiple regions. So essentially, you are backing up your environment directly into Azure, and also, first of all, you are ticking the box of having an off-site backup. Second, you have your backup in more than one location. And lastly, in case you want to restore those ones, then you have the option of either restoring back to your on-prem, or just restore them inside the Azure itself and spin up your VM as another virtual machine inside Azure and use it. So this is just one example, but there are too many other services that you can use when your infrastructure is staying on-prem or in your data center.
So you're saying, Keivan, just if I got it right for the audience, so if some of our audience are already on premise and they've got their own backup regime right now, daily,
Yeah.
weekly, monthly, and they're backing up to a NAS device or a SAN device or a digital tape device, an option now is to either replace that regime with Azure Cloud Storage, or add Azure Cloud Storage as an off-site, as a secondary copy in addition to there. So there's flexibility and options. Did I hear you correctly?
Yes, that's totally correct. Just keep in mind, when you have your on-prem environment, backup environment, you have to have either, for example, a backup server and a big pool of storages to contain all those backup data. With using this Azure service, then you're taking away that complexity, because many times the storage disks are prone to for the aging, and then they get, many times they go out of warranty and they fail. So with utilizing the Azure services, you are taking that out of occasion. You're just paying for backup service, your data is backed up, and that with the highest level of availability and the scalability as well, because often we have many clients coming and saying, oh, we have just added a new workload, which is, for example, another 2 terabytes, but our backup storage, because it's holding the retention of last 3 years for all the servers, it doesn't have more space for host those new backups. So that takes all those complexity away.
Right, excellent. And is there any other use cases that would benefit somebody who's not ready yet to move VMs across, but can utilize some of the other Azure services for on-premise infrastructure?
Yes, sure. The main one that we have seen many actually opt in for this service is disaster recovery, because again, similar to backup, but in a different way. You may have your environment running on-prem with a few servers, and then to have a disaster recovery plan in place, you either have to have completely another separate a data center in the picture, set up with all your application and servers, or you can opt in with Azure, what is called Azure Site Recovery Service, which is a disaster recovery service by Azure, that basically grabs a copy of all of your servers on premise and keeps a copy of them in Azure and continuously synchronizes that copy with your on-prem. In case any disaster happens to your on-prem, say power failure or hardware failure or any issue that you may have on your data center, then Azure has the latest copy of your files and servers in Azure. And when I say latest copy, I'm talking about just 4 minutes ago. Like it continuously replicates all those data. So if your server crashes, then you have a copy from like literally a few minutes ago in Azure. And then there is actually automation piece that we can put in place that a service can automatically switch from your on-prem into the disaster recovery environment in Azure as well. So yes, we can use the RP, we can use the R services of Azure as well, even if you don't have any workload ongoingly running in Azure.
I know we've done a few clients. So just to hear you, just to echo back what I think we heard, is that that's a form of automated failover, not quite failover, and then fail back. And the failover means that those virtual machine files that are sitting there idle get spun up by Azure very quickly once a customer invokes DR in your scenario, and the system will fail over to Azure, those virtual machines that have been replicated in the background continuously, the recovery point objective and the recovery time objective can be very, very quick and very narrow. And then when the on-premise, correct me if I'm wrong, when the on-premise system is restored to normal health, then the customer could invoke fail back, which will allow Azure to then fail back to the on-premise. Is that what happens?
Yes, that's completely correct, Peter. Yes, we can do the failover to Azure and fail back. And the beauty of it is that while the environment is in normal state and nothing has failed, and we are just doing the synchronization, you are not really paying for a big service to Azure at all. All you are paying is that the clients have to pay only for that storage they are using, because they are replicating your storage, right? So from your service into Azure, you're only paying for that storage space that you have used in Azure, which is really fairly small. And only when you initiate the DR and you do the failover and the virtual machines and applications start coming up in Azure, that's when you pay for those virtual machines as well. And again, often on the disaster recovery situation, that would be a short period of the time, say 1 day, 2 days, or a week, until you fail back to on-prem again. So you pay only for 1 week of utilizing a few virtual machines, and then afterwards you fail back to your on-prem, and everything is back to normal. The RTO and RPO are very important factors that organizations struggle to get a number which is accepted by business. But when we're talking about the Azure services, literally they are just minutes. I've seen like DRPs, mentioning 48 hours of RTO, RPO, which they struggle to get business approval. But when it comes to minutes, then it's much easier to get any sort of, approval from business for that.
That's fantastic. Thanks for that, Keivan. I think that will wrap up our time for Q&A. We're right on 1:15, so if we can just go to that last slide, if I can, because and just to back up what Keivan has said, I've seen that we've some of the clients even on this call have experienced that benefit. So we look forward to having you again for our part 2 and 3 early in 2022. As we wrap up, please consider our eval survey that you will automatically get as we leave you today. The Cloud Migration Checklist ebook, please download it, no charge. And our special offer, if you want to go beyond that, we'd love to have an audience with you to, at a high level, ideate and visualize what your future state would be. On behalf of the crew here at PA, thank you again for joining us, and we wish you a pleasant afternoon. Goodbye.
Thank you all.